The anime starts with an old couple, Shizu and his wife Inai. They were talking about their past, remembering how poor they were when they were young. Shizu felt sad because they couldn't afford a honeymoon back then. But Inai comforted him, saying that just being with him was enough for her. Even though life was hard, their love stayed strong. One day, they visited an apple tree they had planted on their wedding day. The tree had been damaged by a typhoon but still had one golden apple left. As the evening came, Shizu felt bad again, wishing he could have given Inai a better life. He got emotional and started crying. Then, something unbelievable happened. When Shizu looked in the mirror, his face had turned young. Shocked and thrilled, he went to find Inai and saw that she had become young too. Excited, Shizu held her hands and asked her to finally go on the honeymoon they missed. Later, their granddaughter, Mino, came to visit and was surprised to see her grandparents looking young and full of energy. Though confused, she recognized them immediately. Jokingly, she told Shizu to keep his hair long because it suited him and teased Inai, asking if she could borrow him. Inai laughed and said no. When Mino went home, she told her father, Yoshiaki, about their transformation, but he didn't believe her and thought she was joking. Meanwhile, in the village, some elderly neighbors were playing games and wondering why Shizu and Inai hadn't joined them lately. Suddenly, a handsome young man showed up, catching the grandmother's attention. To their surprise, it was Shizu. Inai arrived with tea and explained what had happened. One of the old men was so shocked that he spilled tea on himself. Few days ago, Yoshiaki visited his parents and asked them to move in with him for their safety. But Shizu refused, saying the land was part of their family history and he couldn't leave it. Inai calmed everyone down, saying that as long as she was with Shizu, nothing else mattered. The next day, Yoshiaki's wife, Kid, brought groceries to their house. She was startled to see a handsome man, Shizu. Embarrassed, she quickly left to calm down. When Yoshiaki arrived, he finally saw what Mino had meant about his parents looking young. Mino hugged her young grandfather happily, but Kid wasn't too pleased. She playfully scolded Shizu and sent him away with a slap. Before Yoshiaki left, Inai told him not to overwork himself and lovingly stroked his head, reminding him of his childhood. Yoshiaki smiled, and Mino joined in, enjoying her grandmother's warmth. The next morning, the village was excited about the sports festival. Since there were fewer children in the area, most of the participants were elderly. Many were nervous about competing because they didn't want to get hurt, especially since the Igarashi brothers always won. But when they saw the young and strong Shizu, they became hopeful. Despite Inai's protests, Shizu was chosen to represent their team. At the festival, an older man named Hawk showed up with his grandsons, Igarashi Sha and Igarashi Day. The brothers were confident they would win again and teased everyone else. But one of the villagers, Sono, revealed their secret weapon, Shizu. Hawk laughed, thinking Shizu was a young relative, but his laughter stopped when he realized Shizu was the original, now rejuvenated. The first event was tug-of-war. Sha and Day tried their best, but Shizu's strength was unbeatable. Even though they won, Hawk believed his grandson still had a chance. Meanwhile, the villagers wanted Inai to be their team's cheerleader. At first, Inai felt shy, but then she joined the cheering. Her happy and loud encouragement gave the older team so much energy that they easily won the first event. Next came the relay race. Sha, one of the grandsons, ran as fast as he could to win back the lead. His grandfather, Hawk, was sure they would win. But when Shizu and Inai started running, they were amazing. Because they had been together for 70 years, they worked perfectly as a team. They quickly caught up and passed the others, winning again. The last event was carrying a big ball together as a team. Shizu and Inai moved smoothly, while the younger team struggled. Sha began thinking about how much he needed to improve, while his brother Day just wanted to hide because he felt embarrassed. Hawk was angry. He not only saw his grandsons lose but was also reminded of the time, 70 years ago, when Shizu married Inai, even though Hawk had loved her too. Even though he was upset, Hawk congratulated Shizu and Inai for their win. Later, Inai talked to Hawk and said sorry for not going easy during the games. Hawk asked if she ever wished she had chosen him instead of Shizu. Inai gently said no. She was happy with how her life turned out. To make him feel better, she gave him some food and listened to him talk about the past. Hawk told her about losing his wife and raising his grandsons alone. Inai smiled and said his grandsons reminded her of how kind he was as a young man. This made Hawk feel a little better. Before leaving, Hawk promised to compete again next year. As the festival ended, Sha began to understand why his grandfather tried so hard to win. It wasn't just about pride. It was his way of remembering his past and honoring the love he lost. A flashback showed a young Hawk bravely proposing to Inai many years ago. A week later, Hawk gave Sha a task, deliver a package to Shizu and Inai's house. Nervously, Sha knocked on their door, and Mino, Shizu and Inai's granddaughter, answered. Sha was surprised to see that Mino was actually his classmate. Trembling, he handed her the package. Mino invited him in, and although Sha agreed, he instantly felt nervous. He played with his phone because he didn't know what to say. Mino was really popular at school, and this made him feel shy. But Mino was friendly, and soon they started chatting. Inai and Keed, Mino's mom, secretly watched them. Keed immediately thought her daughter had found a boyfriend. She started imagining Mino getting married, having kids, and all the responsibilities that come with it. Shizu came in, warmly thanked Sha, and showed him kindness. Sha was surprised by how welcoming Shizu was, especially compared to the women secretly spying on him. When Sha left, he realized he wanted to talk to Mino again. He even asked his grandfather to give him more tasks involving the Sato family, hoping to see her. Back at home, Mino asked her grandparents how they fell in love. Shizu told her about their struggles. Marrying for love was hard back then because parents arranged marriages. Shizu's father had even picked another bride for him. But Shizu refused and chose Inai instead. Inai, being brave, even scared off the other woman. Hearing this story, Mino begged her grandmother to act out that bold moment. Though embarrassed, Inai agreed to show her. She grabbed Mino's face and dramatically pretended to give a warning, just like she had done back then. Everyone laughed and clapped. Mino hugged her grandmother and said she was the coolest ever. The next day, two schoolboys walked through town, complaining about how boring it was. They joked about moving to a big city like Tokyo because the town was full of old people. But they stopped complaining when they saw a beautiful woman nearby. It was Inai. Her youthful look surprised them, and they blushed while nervously saying hello. After that, they kept finding excuses to walk through the area, hoping to see her again. Later, Inai remembered a day when she found an ad for a clothing sale in some old newspapers. She admired the pretty dresses in the ad. That memory came back when Shizu gave her a package. Inside was a gorgeous white dress. Inai was so happy and surprised by the thoughtful gift. Shizu acted like he didn't know who sent it, but his playful joke made her laugh. They enjoyed a lovely dinner together that evening. One evening, Inai and Shizu tried watching a teenage drama that Mino recommended. Shizu got annoyed because the characters kept saying, "I love you" over and over. He thought true love didn't need to be so dramatic. But Inai loved the show and even asked Shizu to act like one of the characters. Shizu played along, even though he thought it was silly. The moment reminded them of their younger days, and Shizu realized their love was still strong. Inai secretly enjoyed the show so much that she blushed while watching. The next day, Mino helped an elderly woman who spoke in a confusing, old-fashioned way. Mino didn't understand her and felt awkward. Luckily, Inai arrived and introduced the woman as Kacha, a fisherwoman and an old friend. Kacha teased Mino, saying she should marry one of her grandsons. Inai laughed and said Mino was too young for that. Later, another girl named Shai came to stay with Shizu and Inai. She had argued with her dad and said she wouldn't go back home. Shai was amazed at how young and lively her grandmother looked. Inai gave her food and encouraged her to talk about her feelings. Shai shared how her friends had left her because she was always busy studying. She felt pressured by her dad to become a doctor, but she didn't think she was smart enough. Inai reminded her of when she was little and wanted to become a doctor to help her sick grandmother. This made Shai feel a little better, and she hugged Inai, feeling loved. In a flashback, Inai remembered being too sick to go on a family trip. Shizu stayed home with her and joked that her beauty in a swimsuit would have made others jealous. Back in the present, Inai looked at a clothing catalog and thought swimsuits had become too revealing. She decided to wear the beautiful white dress instead, feeling confident. One day, Inai got a phone call from scammers pretending to be her son. She played along, recorded the call, and got their address. Then she handed the details to the police, who arrested them. Later, while testing her eyesight, Inai surprised everyone by reading tiny details in a newspaper that others couldn't see. To tease Shizu, she read aloud a sweet message saying he was the most amazing man. Both of them blushed. When Mino tried reading, Inai made her read, "There's someone I like." Mino stopped, embarrassed. Another time, Mino asked if her grandparents held hands when they were younger. Inai said they didn't because it wasn't common back then. But in truth, they often held hands to support each other. On a shopping trip, Inai didn't wear a glove on one hand, hoping Shizu would notice. When he didn't, she playfully held his hand herself. The next day, they visited their son Takahiro at his clinic. He was amazed by how healthy and young his parents looked. While waiting for test results, Takahiro thought about how he became a doctor to help others, inspired by his mom's illness when he was young. Inai felt proud of him for keeping his promise. In another memory, a big storm had nearly destroyed their apple orchard. Shizu and Inai worked hard to save the trees, and one of them grew a special golden apple. Unsure if it was safe to eat, they took a bite and felt thankful for the gift. One night, Inai dreamed about an hourglass crushing her, and Shizu said he had the same dream. They realized it was their 58th wedding anniversary. Shizu said he hadn't planned anything, but Inai found a cake in the fridge. They laughed and shared the cake, feeling grateful for their love and health after so many years. After enjoying some cake, Inai and Shizu noticed a kitten nearby and began reflecting on their past. Shizu explained that he had once attended school, but he never finished because he was overwhelmed with work. Inai, in turn, thought back to her own school days in Japan, remembering the freedom to eat as much as she wanted. However, after the war, everything changed, and she had to leave the city for the countryside because it wasn't safe anymore. Although she didn't like getting muddy at first, meeting Shizu made it feel okay. Tokyo had been exciting, but something important was missing for Inai. Shizu wondered what that was, but she kept it to herself. Suddenly, their granddaughter Mino arrived, bringing a PlayStation her dad had sent for them to play with. They decided to try a horror game, which felt incredibly real. Inai kept praying for safety as they struggled to play, especially when they had to open drawers without permission, making them lose interest. But when they stopped worrying about being human in the game, they found a way to win. Mino was amazed by their success. They played on, fighting zombies attacking a farm. With a chainsaw, they quickly defeated the zombies, becoming unstoppable in the game, handling both ranged and close combat with ease. The next day, Mino came over to visit, and Shai felt that she would soon be bothering them. Mino rushed to hug her cousin, but Shai asked her to give her space. Mino reminded her of the good times they had shared, but Shai insisted those were in the past. Deep down, Shai wasn't as upset as she let on. She still loved her grandparents and had been visiting them for that reason. Feeling awkward, Shai admitted that she didn't love them as much as it seemed, and Shizu overheard this. He was hurt, not believing his granddaughter could feel that way. But Shai quickly explained it was a misunderstanding, and she asked him to love her again. Shizu was relieved and returned to his normal self, knowing his granddaughter still cared for him. That night, he peacefully drifted off to sleep. However, Shizu had the same dream again, the one about the hourglass. In the dream, he felt time slipping away, wishing the days would never end because there was still so much he wanted to do with Inai. The dream also reminded him of when they had to turn down a honeymoon trip their children had planned because of Inai's illness. As the dream faded, Shizu woke up, back with Inai. She noticed he was back to his older self, but he told her he felt no pain even though he had aged. It seemed his transformation was temporary. Shizu was a bit sad about returning to his old age, thinking Inai might no longer want him now. Inai reassured him that she had always loved him, not his age, but the person he was. That made Shizu realize she was right. He had been too focused on youth and should have cherished the time spent with Inai, regardless of how he looked. He then asked her to join him on the trip their children had planned, to enjoy more time together. This trip made Inai realize what had been missing in Tokyo, Shizu's true presence and attention. That was the reason she never wanted to return to the big city. The next day, they visited their son Takahiro's clinic. Even though Shizu had returned to his older self, his health was better than expected. Takahiro assured Inai that everything was fine and Shizu's health was improving. However, Takahiro was more concerned about Inai's condition. Since she now appeared to be in her 20s, he worried that her body might not heal as well as Shizu's, affecting her lifespan. Inai, hearing this, revealed her fear to Shizu. She wasn't scared of dying, but if she didn't rejuvenate, it meant Shizu might not have long to live. She didn't want to be alone without him. When the family saw Shizu's condition, they were surprised. But Seo insisted they needn't worry, saying Shizu was still strong. To prove it, Shizu arm wrestled his eldest son, despite the family's concerns. When Shizu won, he earned a special prize, a private outdoor bath for him and his son. The next day, strangers began gossiping about how Inai seemed more like Shizu's granddaughter than his wife now that he was back to his older self. Shizu began pulling away from Inai, feeling uncomfortable. When a salesman appeared, Shizu was embarrassed but agreed to accept his help. Inai, however, couldn't take it anymore and boldly declared that she was Shizu's wife. Later at home, Inai comforted him, reminding him that she would always be his wife and that he shouldn't worry about how others saw them. They enjoyed some cookies together, but Shizu noticed Inai hadn't been eating them as much lately. She explained that she wasn't as fond of them anymore. However, later that night, she woke up craving something sweet. She worried it might tempt Shizu, but he reassured her that seeing her happy was enough for him. They shared the treat, feeling content. Inai then shared a piece of her past with Shizu. She talked about losing her parents and how she had to live with relatives who often mocked her because of her background. To escape, she would visit an old temple where a kind young man once offered her his leftover food. Though hesitant at first, Inai accepted, feeling grateful and realizing not everyone was cruel. This memory led her to reflect on how much Shizu had proven his worth, despite his lack of schooling. She had tested him before, but now, she knew he was the one she truly loved. Despite this, Shizu couldn't stop thinking about the hourglass again. He wondered if turning it back would make him younger, but he also feared Inai might not share the same fate. Despite the risks, he decided to try. When he turned the clock, he noticed a wound under it, which made him realize that Inai might also have a similar wound, and her time could be limited. But he still chose to turn back time, becoming younger once more. He reassured Inai that no matter what happened, he would never leave her alone. This calmed her and gave her a sense of peace. The next day, the group of friends discussed how sad life in the countryside was, feeling that their hard work didn't matter compared to the luxury of the big city. But Inai interrupted their talk, warning them to be careful because chemicals were being sprayed in the area. A motorized sprayer soon passed by, impressing the kids. Later, Katami became upset with his grandson Shu for bringing his enemy to the house. While they were clearing out the warehouse, Shizu noticed many old treasures, like engraved trays and scrolls. Katami didn't want to keep them, but when she found an old chest, Katami paused and became sentimental. He needed time to decide what to do with it. Meanwhile, Shu and Shoyuta left, planning to evaluate the items at a cultural center. Eventually, Katami decided to keep the chest. With the warehouse almost cleared out, Shizu asked Shu about his future. Shu explained that he planned to go to Tokyo and become a football player but was now open to staying in the countryside. Shizu was impressed by Shu's openness and admired his thoughtful promise to take care of the farm. This made Katami emotional, and he decided not to demolish the warehouse after all. Shai, on the other hand, struggled with her lack of motivation. She had hurt her grandfather's feelings by mentioning his lack of high school education. While at the library, she realized her grandfather had wanted to attend school but couldn't due to work. This inspired her to study harder, and a week later, she proudly told him she had ranked among the top students in her exams. Later, Shai overheard her friends talking about Shizu and Shu's growing bond and felt uncomfortable. She hadn't told her grandfather everything, including that he had given his blessing for her to date Shu. This left her uncertain about what to do next. After studying with Shu, Shai invited her grandparents to a cultural festival. Although they initially thought they had missed it, they found out they were free to attend after all. Inai was excited to live out a dream of attending with Shizu. At the festival, Shizu and Inai reminisced about their school days, and Shizu expressed how happy he was to see Inai so joyful. They were approached by a group of students selling food, and one of them accidentally spilled lemonade on Inai. The girls quickly took her to the fashion club to fix her clothes. As Inai emerged in her new outfit, Shizu was amazed. She looked like someone from the past, which made him regret they never got to study together. Later, Inai teased him about whether any of their classmates had liked her. She assured him no one had, which made Shizu briefly question if she had never liked him. Inai laughed and reassured him, reminding him not to be so serious. Meanwhile, Mino worked at a tea cafe at the festival, but it wasn't drawing much attention. Later, during the bonfire, they danced together. Inai, however, had a strange dream about the clock and tried to change it. She accidentally broke it, and the next morning her hair turned dark. Shizu didn't notice anything wrong, but Inai was confused by strange occurrences. When Shizu asked if everything was okay, Inai shocked him by asking, "Who are you calling grandmother?" This left him deeply confused about what was happening to her. Shizu sat next to Inai and asked if she was really herself. He was worried because she seemed so different. Inai, who looked much younger than before, told him she was telling the truth. She explained that she woke up to find the world had changed a lot, almost 100 years into the future. Everything felt strange to her, but she noticed a wedding ring on her finger, which made her believe she was connected to Shizu. She then asked Shizu if she had been the one to propose to him in the past. When Shizu said yes, she was surprised and wanted to know how she had done it and why she had chosen to spend her life with him. Then, she said something unexpected. Shizu should try to make her fall in love with him again. Shizu, even though he was still trying to understand everything, happily agreed.